House Targaryen yet stands tall as HBO announces before the premiere of its second season that House of the Dragon will in fact be returning for a third. Stick around to find out what is in store for the blood of old Valyria. I'm Brennan Sem for the New Wave Nerds. Subscribe down below for more nerd content and commentary. Now let's read the news. From Deadline, House of the Dragon renewed for Season 3 by HBO. Ahead of Sunday's Season 2 premiere, HBO has confirmed it has renewed House of the Dragon for a third season. The news is not a surprise. House of the Dragon creator George R.R. Martin teased in December of 2023 that he was already working with the writing team on Seasons 3 and 4 of the fantasy drama. Based on Martin's Fire and Blood and set 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon tells the story of House Targaryen. Quote, George, Ryan, and the rest of our incredible executive producers, cast, and crew have reached new heights with the phenomenal second season of House of the Dragon, said Francesca Orsi, Executive Vice President, HBO Programming, Head of HBO Drama Series and Films. We are in awe of the dragon-sized effort the entire team has put into the creation of a spectacular Season 2, with a scope and scale that is only rivaled by its heart. We could not be more thrilled to continue the story of House Targaryen and watch this team burn bright again for Season 3. Now, I must admit, I didn't necessarily think the first season was too amazing. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done. Ultimately, the biggest problem is with the pacing, and there's not much you can really do about that when the story spans such a wide period of time. The fact that there is time jumps in between practically every episode make it so that it's a little bit hard to sort of feel for the characters as much as you can in the Game of Thrones mainline series. You don't spend as much time with the characters, and you don't see them necessarily in their formative years moving through these events as they happen minute by minute. In House of the Dragon, often, an episode will take place in one time period and then we'll jump ahead 3 years or 6 years or 10 years or something. And because of that, you get the major beats of the story, but ultimately it feels like there's not as much of a deep connection with the relationships between these characters. Even though we know, like, for example, Queen, or the Lady Rhaenyra, we'll say, and the Lady Alicent, we know that they've been friends since they were children and they've since grown apart. It's a little bit harder to understand that that love and the tension there when you don't necessarily get to see them as often as you would if this were Game of Thrones, or if it were relegated to 2 or even 3 episodes per time block. It would mean that you would get to see a little bit more of those relationships. And then it would mean that the actual impacts of the story and what happens would then hit deeper. See, the thing is, ultimately with, like, say, Rhaenyra and Alicent, we know that they were incredibly close, and then after, the events that take place in the series, they naturally drift apart because they have opposing viewpoints and they make decisions. But in the ending episodes, in the second half of the series, when they're adults, they continue to harken back to that shared relationship they had when they were younger. And even though we see it, it doesn't hit quite so much because we only see it for such a short time. But that being said, I still thought the season itself was incredibly wonderful. I'm really excited to see what they have for Season 2. I hope that ultimately the rest of Season 2 is much more based around the intrigue and politicking of the time. I felt like the first season was ultimately really lacking in that aspect. And granted, as I pointed out in, I think I mentioned this on the comment of our previous video where I talked about this, the cast list in this is much smaller, and so it's a little bit, there's not as much room for the intrigue there when you only have a list of, like, say, 5 or 6 characters as opposed to the double digits of people who could be considered main or secondary characters in Game of Thrones. So there are differences there. I think ultimately that did hurt the season. I think that is probably my biggest complaint, even more so than the pacing, right? Because even if the pacing is awkward and they still have the time jumps, if there's enough going on that you can see the web that the spider is weaving, or in this case, like, say, the scarab is weaving, then I think it ultimately makes for a much better series. I think the thing is, we don't really get to see the results of a lot of the machinations that are set in place, or at the very least, all of the schemes in the first season feel pretty relegated to strictly that episode, again, because of the time jumps. And so I hope with seasons 2 and 3 and a potential 4th that they sort of, I guess, expand the time frame covered or expand the number of episodes that cover a specific time frame. I hope there are less time jumps. I hope we get to see things from A to B to C rather than from A to D, then to G, and on to K or whatever. I hope those letters in the alphabet are in the right order. I was just spouting things off. I think ultimately that would make for a much more rich story, and I think that ultimately you give the characters and the actors much more to work with. And so that's what I'm hoping we see from season 2 and from the subsequent season 3. What I would like to see moving forward in 3 and 4 is if we explore different time periods other than how do I put this without accidentally spoiling anything? Rather than just the reign from Viserys onward. I hope we get to see either we continue moving until we get to the end. Now we're thinking. What I think would be really cool is if season 4, I don't think this should be season 3. I think this should be season 4. I think this needs to be the last thing you do, or a potential season 5 or whatever. I know that they've talked about going on and on. I think the way that you do that is you make that final season all about Robert's rebellion, right? You jump way ahead in time. So it's, when does that happen? Like 15, 20 years before the events of Game of Thrones. I think that would be absolutely amazing to see. And then you can tie in things and explore some more of what is sort of hinted at in the Game of Thrones mainline series. You can see a little bit more of the Mad King's reign. You can see why everybody was so ready to rebel, because obviously the impetus for the start of Robert's rebellion is the stealing of Ned Stark's sister, Lyanna Stark, by Rhaenyra Targaryen, the prince, the heir to the Iron Throne. I would really, really like to see what happens up to that point, to see what causes everybody else to be willing to fight and die. I think that would be incredibly interesting to explore. Ultimately, I think after season 2, I think I may want to move away from this time period that we've been exploring here. I want to see more of the Targaryens' reign. I mentioned in our previous episode that I would really like to see a series about the conquest of Aegon the Conqueror. I would like to see the imposition of this new paradigm of the king of the King of the Andals, the Rhaenyra, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. I think that would be really, really interesting to see. And so I hope that's pretty much where we go with this. I hope that the third season, we move away a little bit from this cast that we've seen in 1 and 2. Not that I don't like the cast. I think that they're all incredible performances, and I really enjoy the characters. But I do want to see a little bit more of this family lineage, a little bit more of what's actually going on here. But why don't we get back and just finish this article real quick? So back to Deadline. The season 2 cast includes Matt Smith, Emma Darcy, Olivia Cooke, Rhys Ifans, Steve Toussaint, Eve Best, Fabien Frankel, Matthew Needham, Sonoya Mizuno, these are probably all pronounced wrong, Glenn Carney, Ewan Mitchell, Harry Collette, Bethany Antonia, Phoebe Campbell, Fia Sabin, and Jefferson Hall. Additional season 2 cast Abubakar Salim, Gail Rankin, Freddie Fox, Simon Russell Beale, Clinton Liberty, Jamie Kenna, Kieran Buitt, Tom Bennett, Tom Taylor, and Vincent Reagan. Martin and Ryan Condal, who also serve as showrunners, are co-creators and executive producers. Sarah Hess, Alan Taylor, Melissa Bernstein, Kevin Delanoy, Lonnie Perister, Vince Gerardis also executive produce. Season 2 House of the Dragon premieres Sunday, June 16th at 9 p.m. Eastern Pacific Time on HBO, streaming on Max. Okay, and so I mean, based off of that cast list, it does appear as though it's really well filled out, and so that sort of refutes the claim that I said earlier about that there's not really all that many main characters. But I do maintain that even though the cast list is really filled out, I feel like the number of actual main characters, of primary characters, is incredibly low. I feel like the number of secondary characters and tertiary characters is so much higher, and because of that, I think that's why it feels like there's not as much intrigue really going on. There are only a few main characters whose relationships and experiences you really necessarily explore. And so I really, really hope that we do get to see more of that. But ultimately, I am really, really excited for this. I think that this is going to be incredibly, based off of my experience with the first season, I think it's obviously going to be well written. I think the cinematography is likely going to be as beautiful. It is worth noting that season 2, as mentioned in the article, the showrunners are Martin and Ryan Condal. Now, these are not the showrunners for the first season. They were writers and they were producers on the first season, but they were not the lead creatives behind this. The original lead team had left, or I think just the initial showrunner had left, and Ryan Condal stepped up to fill that void. Now, that's not necessarily anything, that I'm not going to say that that's a bad sign or a good sign. I'm not going to go so far as to say I think that that's a bad decision. I think in a lot of cases, switching creatives can lead to a sort of discongruence, or I don't know if that's the right prefix for that, but can lead to a little bit of dissonance, let's say, between the storytelling of the previous seasons. But that's not always the case, or sometimes it is the case, and in a good way, right? Like in the example of Star Trek Picard, Terry Matalas took over as showrunner for season 3 after only being, producing seasons 1 and 2, and took the show to entirely new heights. It was critically well acclaimed. The fans loved it, and based off of his run on that one season of the show, he's now getting multiple other deals, right? He's taken over, we discussed in a previous episode that he's going to be leading the upcoming Vision TV series for Marvel, tentatively titled Vision Quest. And there's another news story that we'll be talking about a little later on this week, where he has been tapped to write the script for a remake of the cult classic Enemy Mine that starred Dennis Quaid and Luke Gossett Jr. That's going to be coming to a My Father Before Me, coming to you in a My Father Before Me very soon. Wow, that was a really hard sentence to say for some reason, but stick around for that. And so I don't think necessarily switching creatives is always a bad sign. Another example of where it's potentially being used for to a positive effect is in the case of Daredevil Born Again, right? We'll go back to Marvel. Initially, Daredevil Born Again was going to be completely separate from the first 3 Netflix seasons. All of the Defenders stuff was pretty much gone, and so they were treating Daredevil Born Again not as Daredevil Season 4, but as Daredevil Season 1. And that was a little bit disheartening for someone like me to hear, somebody who absolutely loved the Netflix series, who will do nothing but talk about how amazing it is, apart from Season 2, which I didn't think was as strong as 1 and 3. But still, overall, an incredible show. And then the Daredevil Born Again team gets switched up, new creatives are brought on, and these creatives decide that they're going to, if not make it a direct sequel, a bit of a spiritual sequel, a spiritual successor to the Netflix series. They bring in the old Karen and Foggy, Eldon Henson and Deborah Ann Wool. They bring in a little bit more of the other Defenders cast. There have been some rumors swirling around that Kristen Stewart's going to be returning as Jessica Jones. Mike Colter has said that he would be willing to come back as Luke Cage so long as he can continue to do the next season of Evil, available on Paramount. And so switching creatives is not necessarily bad. But I did want to bring it up because I think it's a point worth mentioning. It is something that I think it can be good to know going in. It can be good to know that, look, this is likely going to be different from what we've seen up until now. And that could be for good or it could be for bad. but it is going to be different. And I think that's something that is always good to know. There's nothing worse than coming into a second season of a series expecting it to blow you away, or, a second, third, whatever, a future season of a series that you really enjoyed, and have it feel incredibly different from the first season, and not in a good way. That's incredibly unsatisfying, and so I don't want anybody to go in and have to feel that level of disappointment. If it is going to be different for better or worse, I want people to know that it's going to be different. But that being said, I do have a lot of high hopes for season 2 of House of the Dragon. Like I said, I thought the first season was great. I think the highest point, or the strongest aspect, rather, of the first season is the cinematography. It is just absolutely beautiful. It is very in keeping with what I expect from Game of Thrones, and the fact that these shots are unique and artistic, and they're not bland, and they sort of tell you something about the scene. They tell you something about the state of mind of the character. For example, my favorite shot from the first season happens at, I think it's the opening, maybe not the very opening. It's early on in episode 6. So we get another time jump. This is after Rhaenyra has become an adult, and she is giving birth to her next child. And there's this incredibly beautiful tracking shot where she's walking along down the hallways going to see Alicent Hightower, and it's just so beautiful, and it feels the tracking shot, the fact that it's a continuous take where we just follow Rhaenyra, it really emphasizes the struggle that it's taking her to undergo this walk. I mean, she's just given birth, and now she's walking through the castle, walking up these steps because she's been called by Queen Alicent. And it really emphasizes the arduous task that is. And I just absolutely loved it. It was beautiful, and I feel pretty confident in saying that we're going to probably continue to see that in season 2 and 3 moving forward. As the article mentioned, season 2 premieres just last Sunday, June 16th, so episode 1 is out now. Go ahead and give that a watch. I will be watching it later today. I'm really, really excited for season 3 of this. I'm glad that we're getting more Game of Thrones. I'm glad that we're getting more in this universe. It's a little bit disheartening to know that George R.R. Martin is pretty directly involved with this, just because I want to see the 6th book at some point in my life. I would really enjoy that. But despite that, it is good to know that the original creative mind behind the universe, behind the book and the ideas, is coming and adding his thoughts to the process and lending his pen, as it were. And so I'm sure that seasons 3 and a potential 4 are going to live up to the high quality that we mostly expect from Game of Thrones, barring season 8, and what we expect following the first season of House of the Dragon. I'm really excited. Let me know down below in the comments what you guys think. Are you excited for this? Did you already expect this? Do you think it's a little early to be announcing season 3 before we even get the audience reaction to season 2? I don't know. Let me know down below. Also, let me know what you would like to see come from a season 3 and a 4. Like me, do you want to sort of see us move on into a different time period, a little closer to the Game of Thrones mainline series? Do you want to see us go back in time and see Aegon the Conqueror? Or do you want to just see the direct impact, the direct consequences of season 2 moving forward? I think either is valid, and either way, I am going to be really, really excited for it. But we'll be sure to keep you apprised of any more news. We'll be back to talk about season 2 once it finishes up, and we'll be back here tomorrow with a brand new news segment, and I will see you guys then.